This is Burma from MMP Games. It's part of the Operational Combat series, and we're going to be playing the campaign 2, which is the slightly shorter version of the campaign. It's only 41 turns, but it actually starts at the moment the Japanese launch their attack across the Chinwen Hill. The reason I've picked this is because the longer campaign, it gives a lot more options for playing the game differently from what happened historically. But I think the idea that the Allies would know that the offensive was coming, admittedly, it might not come from the same place or in the same force, but I think that initial foreknowledge would be detrimental to the Japanese. Anyway, if anyone's played the first campaigns and disagrees with me, fine, let me know. Right, we'll look at the game in terms of its components. This is 1999, so it's a fairly old game. It's the map is really nice, very colourful and everything. The only criticism I might have of the map is it doesn't really give you an idea of just how terrible the terrain is here. You've got jungle-clad hills. You can just see from all these ridges that are nasty sort of hills with ridgeback hills covered in jungle. You've got big rivers, you've got marshes, you've got jungle, rough upland with jungle along it. It's not particularly pleasant the further north and west you go. Well, even the further north anyway. If you went up towards China, the terrain's getting progressively worse. The only decent flat terrain is around here, around Mandalay. In terms of the components, now the game, I think it comes with version 3 of the rule set. I'm not sure, but I'm going to be using version 4.2. There is a 4.3 version. If you want it, you can download it off the OCS website. Now, the reason I'm sticking with 4.2 instead of 4.3 is mainly due to the fact that I have a lot of play aids that I've printed off before, which I consider pretty essential for OCS. Which is this is one of the negatives I'd say about OCS, is it doesn't give you the sort of charts you really need. These are the ones I've got. OCS mode summary, that tells you what you can do in all the different modes that units can be in. You've got transport, what can transport stuff, especially in terms of supply, that's really important. You've got a nice little flowchart summary of all the different air operations you can do. You've got an OCS turn summary here that explains what happens in the terms. You've got an OCS supply summary here. This is really important stuff, because supply is the crux of the OCS game. Another thing you've got here is a terrain chart. There is a terrain chart on the board, but it's in a really inaccessible place. It's hard to use, and that is pretty much an essential print off. Again, you can get all this stuff off BCS. Sorry, BCS, I got BCS on the mind. You can get all this stuff off the Board Game Geek websites. Now, I got most of it when I was playing DAC 2, so you might have to look around for these OCS summary charts and help aids, player aids. One thing it doesn't come with, and I couldn't find any on Board Game Geek, was something where you can store your counters to avoid having huge stacks of counters. In terms of other things, there's 2 pages of errata. There are unit errata, which is a bit annoying. There are errata in the game summary. But overall, the counters are nice and everything. I've clipped them, which really makes them look even better. For a game of its age, it's a pretty good quality production. As I've said, I'd criticise it on the fact that OCS really does need play aids. It's a complex system, even more complex than BCS, and because it is totally supply driven, it's difficult to get your head around it. I've got a cat coming over here being annoying because I'm talking. In terms of how I've set the game up, we've got anything with an orange disc is Japanese headquarters, and that will have a stack of counters on the sheet over here. Blue ones are Allied formations, same sort of thing. Anything with a white cube indicates there are supply points here. Now, anything that has supply points with its formation chip its formation disc, it doesn't really matter because they're all on here and they're very visible. The white cubes are there when the supply points aren't visible. Eventually, as units move away from their supply dumps, the supply dumps will become visible and then they won't need the white cubes. If you see a purple disc, that indicates an army HQ, or in the Japanese sense, or it represents an Allied Corps HQ. Other things, the supply sources for the Allies are marked with blue discs, okay, and the supply sources for the Japanese are marked with red discs. There are railways in operation. Both sides have got rail capacity. The Japanese have got a rail capacity of 2 inside Burma, and the Allies have got 6, but it's split between Lido and the other city, which is Silchar. So it's 2 separate, even though it's one big railway. The way the map works, you've got 3 points for each part of the railway. What else can we say about this? Pretty much that's about it in terms of the components and everything of the game. In terms of an OCS one, some people consider this a starter game, and I'd agree. I would say you've got 3 starter games, maybe 4 now. You've got Reluctant Enemies, which is the starter set or module. The only problem with that is I find the war in Syria and Lebanon to be probably the most boring and uninteresting scenario you could possibly make a game about, so I'm not a big fan of that. Another one that's considered good is Tunisia. Now, Tunisia has a lot more units than Burma, but it starts off very small and grows bigger and bigger. So it's a nice game to get yourself going with the early campaign, and then it develops into quite something significant. Burma's big advantage is it never really grows into anything massive. There's a big area, so the actual map is probably about 3 foot by 3 foot, maybe 4 foot by 3 foot. So it's not a huge map, and I would consider this a medium-sized game by my terms. Right, What else can we say? Historically, let's have a look at the game from a historical purpose. It covers the Japanese invasion of India, the Imphal Kohima offensive, and it also covers the Allied counter-offensive, which ultimately resulted in the capture of Mandalay. Excuse me. And the complete annihilation of the Japanese army in Burma. Well, certainly in northern Burma. I don't think southern Burma lasted much longer. I think we can say from this, from the Japanese point of view, this was a really risky operation, and I think it suffered from several problems. One, hubris. The Japanese severely underestimated the capability of the Allied forces, the numbers, and the strength, particularly air strength and stuff like that. They didn't realise how important Allied air supply could be, whereas they were suffering horrendously from supply problems. This is one of the reasons it was picked as an early OCS module. Actually getting supply from Mandalay up the Irrawaddy along the railway and then across the Chindwin over these mountains to the strategic points that you're trying to capture, which are these green discs here, Imphal, and this Indian city on the railway here, is a nightmare. And ultimately that supply line collapsed, and in the ensuing retreat, the Japanese army pretty much starved to death and disintegrated from hunger, disease, and casualties of battle. Another thing about the Japanese army is pretty good. You've got a lot of troop quality 5 units, some 4s and 3s. Overall, better than the Allies. The Allied units are very, very sort of mismatched. There are Chinese units which is poor as quality 0. And there are other Allied units which are quality 5. So it's a bit of a mixed bag for the Allies. The Allied units involved are British, Australian, Indian, Chinese, American, and Burmese. So on the Japanese side, it's just mainly Japanese, though there are some Indian National Army units involved. If you look on the board, if you see an orange disc, that is a Japanese formation. I may have already explained this, but if I have, just ignore me. And the blue discs are the Allied formations, which correspond to the units over here on this chart. Other things, I think the Japanese thought they would be able to capture Allied supplies, which would enable them to keep the offensive going. I don't think that ever came off. They also had problems. There were the Chindits operating in their rear in central northern Burma, and you also had the Chinese army, Stilwell's Chinese American army over there, and I believe the Chinese Yunnan army will make an appearance as well at some point. So all in all, the Japanese have the formations to do this. They have them in the right place, and the Allies were taken a bit by surprise, but this is really a difficult one for the Japanese to win. But whether the Allies can repeat what they did historically is is anyone's guess. Okay, and that's it for the introduction.